We do have Major General Henry Ayola, former commander of Operation Safe Haven in Jos. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good morning, Maokwe.
Indeed. Good morning, General. It's good to see you.
Good morning, viewers. Thank you.
So, on your way here, what did you see? How's the roads for you?
Yeah, it was obvious that people didn't come out. And there were just a few cars that I saw on the road. Public transport were virtually absent. I didn't see any. Yeah.
When you say people didn't come out, are you talking about the protest or people didn't go out generally?
Obviously, many people are not going out to work today. From what, how the road looks.
But it's a bit tricky. Some thought, well, in major city centers, people are a bit cautious. They don't know what's going on. Yeah. But within the vicinity of their neighborhoods, you have persons and little businesses that appear open, just trying to feel their way through the day to see what happens and how they approach it.
Yeah, sure. That's what I see. Of course, being the first day, people will want to see how it plays out first, and then they'll be able to decide maybe by midday if it's safe to go out or not.
But what is your impression of how first the demands have come through and how government has responded to it?
Yeah, I think I'll give kudos to both sides, really, to government side and to the protesters. For me, if you ask me, I think the battle is won already. And there's no victor, there's no vanquish, because we could see the preemptive responses of government to some of the demands. And the protesters so far have also demonstrated that it's an issues-based protest and that they are willing to keep it peaceful. But if you ask me as a general, I've seen that before. I've seen situations where you have seemingly innocent crowd. And it's so interesting how it snowballs and transforms from crowd to mob. And when you know the psychology of mob mentality and actions, I don't feel settled yet, even with what we are seeing now. I'd rather not have this temptation at all.
But we've seen protests in this country. Can we actually say that we have seen deliberate efforts of security agencies moving into anyone who is there to disrupt the protest? Because what many will tell you they've seen is security agencies disrupting the peaceful protesters themselves or across board.
Yes, it's difficult to deny that because that was seen in the last NSAS protest. But it also will not be fair to generalize it for all the time and for all governments. But again, it's the body language of government that determines what the security agencies will do. There are people under authority anyway. But in fairness to this government, we've seen that it's a listening government, it's a sensitive government, and it's been receptive and responsive sufficiently to give us some comfort and confidence that they will not go that route.
It's interesting you said that, for someone like you, you'll still be very cautious about what we're saying right now. You would have preferred to resist the temptation. And I think those are the words that particular word you use, temptation. And I'm trying to say, well, it's understandable. You are from the background of a military general. But how the reality is that this is a democracy. And these are rights enshrined in our constitution. I want to move away from that. And we're seeing increasingly that the crowds are coming out. This is Sokoto. These are visuals coming in from Sokoto right now. We can see what is happening. It was seen that there are sporadic protests here and there. People have spoken about the organizers of the protests being faceless. But we know that the people who are coming out are not faceless. They are Nigerians, and these are their faces. And sometimes some people will say, perhaps that's why this protest is very interesting, because it would seem that for years, the common Nigerian has had no way to express himself or herself. There's been no avenue for the voice of the ordinary, the most basic person to be heard, through official government quarters. And it would seem that this is like one of the few times that we have even seen, that people have said, look, we want to protest, and, government is willing to engage. There have been different levels of engagement. For you, what does this say about, our engagement processes with ordinary, everyday Nigerians? Yeah, we know that government is used to doing it through bodies, the NLC, TUC, NANS, student body, etc. But we know increasingly also that there are so many people who are disenchanted or are not captured by these bodies and whose voices need to be heard. How do you think that government can continue to further engage with these levels of people to explain its policies and perhaps the consequences of some of its decisions?
Yeah, thank you very much. In fact, if you give me the opportunity, my advice to the government is this, very, very simple. For a while, even before this particular government, even from the last government has been so reactive rather than being preemptive, even in engaging the citizens. And that has created this kind of atmosphere where there is kind of mistrust or distrust between the citizens and the government. Now, I would advise President Bola Tinubu particularly to reconfigure his media team. It should be a media stroke public relation team. Leaders in this country have not been using the professional body. We have a National Institute of Public Relations, in this country with very sound technocrats who can frame a whole media strategy for the government. This one we have been seeing so far is a matter of reacting to one thing or the other. There should be, when the government has a program, there should also be an accompaniment of a media PR strategy to match and sell that program. That we engage, the public, not after something has happened, no, on a regular basis with well-packaged programs. The National Orientation Agency has been sleeping for years. And that's the problem when you have government that are, more or less put in abeyance the processes in the system. So people have gone to sleep. I mean, if you take a bird and put it in a cage after a long time, the day you release it to fly, it won't fly. That's where we are as a nation. A lot of the engine of government are in a prostrate state because of the overbearing nature of previous government not allowing processes and systems to work. And so the people are just sitting, the people forgetting what they used to do in the past. So we have processes failing all over the places. It's not only about media, it's everywhere else, everything else. Some of the problems we're talking about coming out of policy fallouts, spin-off of policy decision, they're also a result of failure to go through policy process. There's no such thing as a verbal policy. Not even at the home level does the father wake up one morning and say, from today, no more this and that, and that's it. There is a policy process. When the president speaks, it's an expression of intention that should now kickstart the policy process from setting the agenda to formulation of policy, to adoption of policy, to implementation, to evaluation. We have people who are experts in this field. It's why you have run through that. There are even proprietary software applications for playing out and simulating these policies up front, so you know what the effects and consequences will be, and you prepare how to engage that and how to deal with it up front before you turn out the policy. That's how nations run. It's very shameful that we are running like this in this age, 21st century. So it's everywhere you can think about. I mean, you have something as saying that we're duplicated subheads in our budget. How do you, in this age and time, that means our budgets have been done manuscript. That means we don't have proprietary software applications that will have run through you have a template for each ministry, and then there will be called the peculiar subhead of each ministry we can transfer. If we have that, then we can't be talking like this. We can't be talking like this as if we have learned nothing all this while. So it's everywhere. So we need to go back to fundamentals. We need to go back to get the engine of government. If an engine has not been running for years, you don't just kickstart it and expect it to start running immediately. It doesn't work that way. So we need to go back to so many things. The National Orientation Agency should have a leader who will be giving some marching orders of what the president wants to see over a time. We need to mobilize the whole nation afresh. We have all gone comatose. It's a nation that has been so browbeaten by leaders who have boxed us to a corner, to a state of stupor. So we need to all wake up together.
And some people will say perhaps this is citizens' attempt at waking up. They say, look, you're leading people. You're not leading the sand or inanimate objects. You're leading human beings, and they certainly expect better from their leaders. Kabiesi, it's very interesting. I was just looking at the irony of that. The fact that your leadership title is about asking questions. The fact that we cannot ask a king question. But here we are, asking and demanding answers of a king. I just want to, ask about this issue of, because what has really brought this up is the cost of living. The cost of living crisis has, made people very uncomfortable, and they have a need. And now of course, there'll be lots of other demands that will be added to this, some of them political in nature. I mean, depending on who you ask or what group you ask, because it does appear that there are different coalitions of groups coming up with their own demands. And some people will say this is perhaps good because it's also showing some engagement with the democratic process. However, looking at the fact that for years now, the kinds of protests that we have been saying have bordered on the welfare of people, subsidy and its removal or staying has been at the heart of what it is that we're discussing. For instance, in 2012, when the Occupy Nigeria protest happened, it was around issues of removal of petrol subsidy. The NSAS protest was a little different. The demand was around police brutality, and later on other demands around governance entered it. Now we're talking about, there's a general overview or general demand of end bad governance. But at the heart of it is what is happening around the cost of living. People are able to. Do you think that government has been able to communicate effectively and educate the people, the connections between some of the things that have happened over the years? Because during the Occupy Nigeria protest, even though we have been told that at that time there were political elements in it, and the people who are currently at the helm of affairs right now cannot be extricated from those protests. They knew then, just what removal of subsidy would mean for the economy of Nigeria. And now, inevitably, now that they are there, they have had no choice than to take away the same subsidy which they once refuted. So do you think that there has been sufficient education of the populace as to what exactly, and transparency? Because some people will even argue that this subsidy that government said was gone is actually back, but it's back in a way that they cannot be transparent about. Has there been sufficient honesty and education with the people to say, look, this is what is currently going on, this is where we are, this is where we're hoping to go?
Thank you very much. I think I'll borrow some few, points from what General Yola said. The people there is disconnection between the government and the people. What the problem? Look, it is this thing. What we are seeing today does not start today, and some of these issues are fundamental. The people are not connected. There's a big gap. The PR is not well done. It's not well processed. If the government, I've sat down with the president when they came in. I went to visit him. We had the president meant well, but at the same time, his components, things are not done properly.
Is he aware?
Well, I think with the reality now, this is a wake-up call. Is he aware? This situation is a wake-up call. The people who are supposed to do the job, they are not doing it right.
What do you expect to see from him after this?
What I expect to see from him after this, I think the president needs to reshuffle the whole cabinet.
The whole?
Yes.
All or some?
No, the whole cabinet.
None is working?
The president is my man, but I'll tell you the truth. He needs to look, these are not demand. I look at all these transformative policies. These are policies that will bring prosperity to Nigerians at the end of the day.
So will you be disappointed if he doesn't reshuffle?
Well, I will be disappointed. That's the truth.
Will you find a way to let him know as well?
I will. But I'm telling you today, as we speak now, the president is going through a lot of things in his mind now. You will see the result of this. That's why on the side of the protesters, like you said, there's no, for me, I don't have any problem with them. On the side of the government too. So nobody wins. It's win-win. It's just a wake-up call. Government come up with, reality. The people have been disconnected. I wonder what is the Minister of Information doing?
Well,
I wonder what is the people in the media space, what are they doing? So some of these issues, if the president, like he said, like General Yola said, if you plan policies, that will be in the process. There are processes towards implementation. And again, if you have good policies, if you don't implement it well, you'll find out that there'll be a backlash. So these are issues that are fundamental. And I think the government is a wake-up call for the government to come to reality. Thank you.
We understand the situation of protest there in Imo State, Southeast Nigeria, which incidentally is just next door to Rivers State in South Nigeria. So bring us more when you have updates, Tokwe. But let's go back to Samson Itodo of YIAGA Africa and get his thoughts on what we've seen across the states now, from the nation's capital, Abuja, to Rivers State, and now Imo State. Samson, well, Imo State, for one, the protest doesn't seem to be holding. That's in Southeast Nigeria. In River State also, we've not seen as much activity, right? And then the nation's capital has seen some sort of activity from the Moshood Abiola Stadium to yet another part. So what do you make of this? The Take It Back movement had given a list of venues they wanted to use, but on getting to some of these venues, they're not there. So is this a function of the courts? Is this a function of maybe a change in strategy? They're waiting to watch. What do you deduce from this, Samson?
I think it's a combination of factors, and they may not be far from the ones that you've highlighted. First, it could be the court judgment. It could also be that the protesters have been intimidated to the extent that they withdraw their preparations or plans for the protest. It could just be a lot of factors. In the build up to this protest, there have been several. There's appropriation of a lot of underhand tactics to get to discourage people from either organizing or participating in the protest. We've seen a torrent of fake news and disinformation targeted at the protesters, and all this is just aimed at demobilizing those protesters in those states. So I think it's a combination of factors. But the fact that whether in those states these protests are not holding today does not mean that the people in those states do not support this advocacy and this demand, and you don't need to have protests across the entire country for the governments to actually take action, and that is what we saw with the NSAS. That's what we have also seen with previous protests. If some states are still going ahead with the protest, I think that it's enough and also a powerful message that citizens are sending and communicating to the government. So I don't think that whether it takes place in those states, it makes any significant difference. It doesn't mean that those people are not protesting, the fact that they are not on the streets.
Samson, interesting point there. But let's also speak to what's happening in Abuja and Lagos. We hope that we'll get the actualities from Lagos shortly. But in Abuja, we've seen one of the leaders of the protest, Mr. Deji Adeyanju, say that no matter how uncomfortable the court order is, they would stay at the MKO Abiola Stadium. But in Lagos, we're getting feelers that the protesters are moving from where they had converged to Alausa, despite that court order secured, restricting them to one particular venue. Speak to these court orders and the impact on the nature of the protests so far. Yeah, there you have the actuality from Lagos. The protesters, embarking on the procession. This is Ikeja, and you can see that they have moved from Ikeja Underbridge, and they're proceeding. From the feelers we're getting, they're moving to Alausa, Ikeja. So, Samson, over to you. Speak to, the court order and the impact on this protest.
So this point about the court order, I think it's one big lesson that we all need to pay close attention to. The fact that states, and these are state-sponsored, litigation, have approached the courts, to secure injunctions, interim or ex parte orders in this case, that seeks to limit the protest to certain in certain places, certain locations, and also in some cases, even though they recognize that this right to protest is constitutionally guaranteed. Again, we're going to be reviewing this judgments, and these are ex parte orders anyways. But these ex parte orders were released 24 hours before the protest. So it is possible that for some of these protesters, they haven't been served this order. Even though I think for one of the states, I saw the enrollment order, but whether it has been communicated or served on the leaders of the protest is one that will be a subject of conversation today and also subsequently. That's one. Two, for the Abuja protesters who have restricted themselves to the stadium, I think they are doing so, in fulfillment or in compliance with the court order. But what does that tell us as a country? It just simply tells us that these protesters, all the way, we're not in any way going to engage or appropriate violence for elections, for the protest. It tells you that they are also law-abiding. The fact that they've restricted themselves is in compliance with what? A court order. So it tells you, and it showcases the disposition of these protesters, that they are committed to upholding the rule of law. Two things can happen. When an ex parte order, is issued, in 14 days, whether the order is vacated or not, the order becomes ineffectual after 14 days. And now the protesters and their lawyers can go to the courts and seek, a vacation of that particular order. But if you've seen these protesters restrict themselves, it tells you that they are law-abiding and they also uphold the rule of law, because part of the demands they are also making is that government also upholds the rule of law. And so if the protesters are complying, what we also expect, from state officials and government is that when the court rules that compensation should be paid to victims of human rights, the state should not hesitate, to do what? To comply with the judgments. That when rulings come, they should also do what? Comply, because of the rule of law, because we are a constitutional democracy. So these are some of the issues. But it does appear that this was really a calculated attempt, by the leaders of those states to prevent these protesters, from procession, despite the assurances that the police and the IG of police and also his commissioners of police did assure people that the protesters specifically, that they were going to provide them the necessary protection.
All right, Itodo. I want you to speak to how things built up to this point. There were loads of rhetoric, threats, appeal, insistence, and then we're seeing what's playing out. I want you to speak to it in the context of what you make of our democracy. Contextually, freedom of expression, freedom to assemble. It may be early in the days because we haven't seen how the day one will play out, but I want you to reference this to our ideal of democracy. What do you make of this as far as our democracy is concerned?
There are three basic things, Geoffrey. What do I make of this with respect to our democracy? I think on one hand, I'd say that our democracy is advancing. We are making significant progress in our democratic process. The fact that citizens, are speaking and they are ventilating their views, they are engaging with government, it's a good sign, for our democracy. And that's something that we shouldn't lose sight of. The second point is that there's a place for voice in democracy, that the power that citizens have is their voice. But one thing that I've also seen is this democratic backsliding that seems to be manifesting in an attempt to censor, an attempt to limit, and an attempt to undermine the voices of citizens. Because if you see the torrents, of not just fake news, but fake organizations and individuals who have been sponsored, by actors to counter this protest, it's just a shame. Especially given that all the institutions, both religious and traditional institutions, including the president and also his officials, recognize that there's hardship in the land. But you still see some individuals, appropriate the media to do what? To cast aspersions on citizens who are making legitimate claims. And these are signs and manifestation of democratic backsliding that we must actually avoid. And the third point, it's the role that institutions do play. And you can't have a vibrant democracy if you don't have strong and viral institutions. Some of the demands that the protesters have made wouldn't have been made if our institutions were functioning optimally. And if decisions of thoughts of committees, have been implemented. And so when you think about a political will, is there political will on the part of actors to addressing some of the problems that citizens have said? One is the fact that people are hungry, people are impoverished, people are suffocating with poverty, and there is need to declare an emergency to address this problem. Democracy loses its vitality if it doesn't address and improve the social conditions of people. And so when people are complaining and are crying that some policies of government are so harsh that